With us now is the very musically accomplished guest, Brian Gari. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
You're phenomenal.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That list kind of stopped at a certain time. I have to update my website, I guess.
Well, we were talking a little bit about all the things that you've accomplished, but you have 3 books and how many DVDs and CDs? 10 albums?
Yeah, I've lost count really because I've done so many different types of projects. Sometimes it's for other people. Obviously, I've done a lot on my own, as you know, singing my own songs too. So there's the Neil Sedaka projects and the Yvonne Rome and Jana Robbins and Margaret Whiting and people like that. But then, you know, there are all these solo albums I've done too.
And you're doing this wonderful tribute to your grandfather, Eddie Cantor.
I've done that since about 1990, I think. I've been producing albums and DVDs, CDs of all sorts on my grandfather to keep his name alive.
Now, what was your experience like growing up in a family that was maybe just not your typical family?
Well, now my grandfather lived on the West Coast and I live here on the East Coast. So I would go to visit my grandfather every summer until I was 12 years old. That's when he passed away. In fact, this October celebrates my 50 years of songwriting, but it's also when my grandfather passed away, 1964, October. And so I used to see him every single summer, and it was a wonderful time. I describe it a lot in a book I wrote called Close Encounters of the Celebrity Kind. And I talk about, you know, meeting Jack Benny and Groucho Marx and Danny Thomas and Georgie Jessel, and these are all old timers. But you know, the book has a lot of contemporary people as well. Johnny Mathis and Jan and Dean and people like that. But you know, I enjoyed my times out in California. It was a great thing to grow up and be able to go and out to California and go to luncheons and things like that, you know, with my grandfather.
And you've written over 800 songs. At what point in your journey so far did you discover that you had talent? How old were you when that moment happened?
Well, you see, I started writing songs when I was 12. Those songs are not very good. But my mother thought they were good. And because of my mother, actually, and my father too, by the time I was 15, they surprised me with a demo of one of my songs. And for people that might not know, a demo is just a little demonstration record. And in fact, it was a record in those days. And
Vinyl.
it was an acetate. It was this thing that could only be played about 4 times before it disintegrates, you know. So they gave me this acetate of 2 of my songs on my 15th birthday. It was a great party that my parents threw for me in the apartment that I'm still in to this day.
Really?
Yeah.
What a blessing that is.
What, being in the same apartment?
That's really great, yeah.
It's a blessing and a curse at the same time because I've never thrown anything out.
Okay.
So,
so maybe we're going to have to take the camera crew there.
Oh, your camera crew would love that, you know, if they could get in to the apartment. But yeah, I've kept pretty much everything. In fact, I make a joke about it in that book I mentioned about, you know, do I still have that? Of course I do. I don't throw any of this stuff out, and it turns out it's valuable. You know, just, you know, all kinds of fun things that I've collected over the years. Jan and Dean fan club buttons and things like that. But anyway, getting back to, thinking or knowing that you have
like
talent.
when was that moment that you said, you know what, maybe I could make a go of it?
Well, when I was 15 and I had this demo, the people that sang on it, the one guy that sang on it was a guy named Jerry Keller. And Jerry Keller wrote and co-wrote a song called Turn Down Day by The Circle, which was a big hit. And he had a hit himself called Here Comes Summer. And he was signed to a company, Leeds Music, which was a division of MCA. And he told my mother and father, you know, this kid might have some talent. You might call this publishing company and, you know, bring him up there with this song. And I went over there with my mom, I think my mother. My father went to a couple of these things. My mother did too. It's kind of awkward, you know, if you think about it, but I was 15. And I went up there and I played this demo. And nobody was taking it right away until Kama Sutra Records. And they had the Love and Spoonful and a lot of other people.
That was, yeah,
It was
a
a big
well-known
company
group.
in the 60s, you know. So I went there. I think I went with my mom, and I was sitting in the waiting area, and a guy comes out. He says, "What do you have for me?" And I said, well, this disc here, and you know, just a little 15-year-old kid. And I hand it to him, and the guy goes in the other room, and I hear my music playing in the background. And he comes back out, and he says, "What do you want for it?" Well, I don't even know how to answer that question. I'm 15, you know, I didn't know what to say. And he says, and he knew I was stumbling, and instead of asking for 100 or 200, he says, "How about $50?" Yeah, 50, that sounds good. I'm 15 years old,
Right.
$50 like $1 million to me.
Absolutely.
And I said, yeah, okay. Turns out that that guy ended up producing Steely Dan. His name
Really?
was at that time Gary Cannon, but he changed it back to his real name, Gary Katz. And that's who, in quotes, discovered me.
Excellent.
And the song did not get recorded at Kama Sutra. I got the song back 2 years later, gave it to a company out in California, and it got recorded.
And that's how you know.
Well, yeah, and then I started well, I was getting songs published starting at 15. So from that point on, I was making $50, $75, $100 a song, and I thought, there must be something in this. I mean, after school, kids would go out and play baseball, and I go down to Tin Pan Alley to the Brill Building and those areas there, and it was more than just the Brill Building. I went from place to place to place. In fact, a lot of songwriters say that they start at the top floor of one of these buildings, like the Brill Building,
Right.
and they ring the buzzer on every publishing company until you get to the main floor. And you see how many songs you can sell to all those companies. I was at the tail end of that
Wonderful
that business
experience.
Yeah.
And so now when you write, do you write with guitar? Do you write with piano? Do you write the lyrics? Do you write the music first? Like what's your process for you?
Usually I get a title.
Okay.
I think of an idea and I think, I should approach that. It gets, when you've written this many songs, it's a very tiring process. And, when you know that if you have an idea for a song and you have to complete it, it's a real big deal. And you have to go to the piano or the guitar and begin that process. And, lyric writing is all done, in the brain. But the music part is something that I've never been able to describe to anyone because it comes out of nowhere. And you don't know where you're getting this idea for a melody, especially a catchy melody. You just don't know, you're hopefully not stealing it,
Right.
know.
Have you ever stolen something from yourself?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, have you ever written something and been like, that's really good,
Yeah.
Brian? And then you realize, like,
Well,
wait, I wrote that already.
Yeah, but
So-
then I say, which song was that? Oh, that's a song nobody knows. I'll use it again,
Yeah, repurposing it.
Yeah, you just hope that you don't have to use both songs in some event somewhere, and then you go, that sure sounds like that one, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And my mother catches me on that. My mother's
Aw.
still alive and not as well as she once was, but she's 86, about to turn 87 in October, and she's a writer herself. She wrote some musicals, and she has a book out called Canterbury Tales, which
Cute.
is very clever,
Yes.
and it's the story of her life.
I love that you gave a shout out to your mom.
Yeah, well, she's been a great supporter of my work, and she would point out, that song sounds like that other song of yours and everything. And I should point out, my father, though deceased, was a very, very strong part of my my upbringing. He was very talented in his own right. He did the portrait of Judy Garland that hung in the Palace Theater for decades. It's now in the Museum of the City of New York. He was also on a TV show that many of the people might remember called Strangers with Candy, which is Amy Sedaris and Stephen Colbert. It was that show. My father played the father on the show who was dead. Very strange thing, He would only be like, he'd be like that. He'd have no lines. And he says, it's the greatest job in the world. I don't have to memorize anything. I just have to do a face. And he was on the show for a couple of seasons.
Well, I always love having people on where we can celebrate their talent because not everybody's born with a talent. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
butcher, baker, candlestick maker, they're all wonderful professions. But I feel like if you were born with a talent, it's almost like your human obligation to fulfill on it. I don't
Well,
know. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like
wonder,
you have to do it?
I don't mean to be overly humble about it and everything, but I wonder how much of it is talent and how much of it is being supported by your parents. Because, I was heavily influenced by the Beatle invasion, the English invasion in the '64. And that's when I wrote my first song. I wrote it based on the music of Peter and Gordon. Peter and Gordon had hits that were written by Lennon and McCartney. In fact, Peter Asher from Peter and Gordon was the brother of Jane Asher, who was the girlfriend of Paul McCartney. So they had some songs, automatically.
Yes.
Peter Asher went on to produce a huge amount of artists, including Linda Ronstadt. But Peter and Gordon sang these songs, and I was heavily influenced by them, and I picked up my guitar and just tried to write a song. And I came up with this song. I don't think it's great, but, my mother thought that there was something there. So when Mom, responds that way, you say, well, let me see. I pleased her once. Maybe I could please her again. I'll write a second one. And next thing you know, you're writing one after another after another. And then after it's your mom that you're pleasing, it's your girlfriend that you're trying to please, or a girl,
woo.
or
Right,
a girl,
yes, right.
you know, or whoever else is, you know, somebody that you want to impress. So, and that's what it's been for me. So that's why, you know, over 800 songs.
It's been a musical love journey for you.
It
Yeah,
is.
I get it.
And it's trying to impress. You
Yeah.
know, you got to admit, you know, I'm not trying to boast, and I never have been trying to boast. I just, you know, I hope that somebody says, hey, that's a good piece of work that you did.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you've made such a wonderful success of things, and you have certainly been part of the American culture. You know, over 800 songs.
800 songs, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Close to 9 now.
Close to 9?
900, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm still trying to get that extra one out there, but you can't force these things.
I once made a list of every boy I ever kissed.
Did you really?
Since the time I was 16, yeah. And you know what? So I guess,
You're not
but I'm not
alone.
up to. But I'm not up to.
It wasn't boys for me, but
But you kept a list.
I kept
Yeah,
I still have the list.
You still have a list?
It stopped at my marriage.
Oh well, I respect that.
And
So-
that's definitely where it stopped. Yes.
No more girls, but more music to write.
Yes.
More songs to do, more CDs.
When did you stop your list?
I'm
still on the
single.
list?
I'm still
Oh.
single. There might be more men for me to kiss.
Ooh,
So
okay. All right.
but now it's all about you. Books. So let's go to your book. So We Bombed in New London. Tell us
Right.
about this book.
That's a book about my 1987 Broadway musical called Late Night Comic, and it tells the story behind how it got to Broadway and what happened afterward.
Okay.
And then I have a book, and by the way, that other book took 17 and a half years to get published, but fortunately Ben Omar at Bear Manor Media put it out, and I'm thrilled. Then he liked my second book. It's not a large book, not a big book, but it's called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to My Stress Test, and my wife said that I wasn't looking too well and I should see a cardiologist. And within 2 days, I was in the hospital for open heart surgery.
She saved your life.
She did. She's a nurse, so that's...
And that's why you don't want to kiss any more girls. Keep that one. She's a good one to keep.
Yeah,
A lifesaver.
Exactly.
And this book?
And then I enjoy writing, and this is called Close Encounters of the Celebrity Kind, and it tells about the celebrities that I've met throughout my life, and it's not, you know, oh, I shook hands with so-and-so and that was it. It has a beginning, middle, and end, each story. There are 37 stories in the book, but they're not just like, oh, I met the so-and-so.
Right.
It's a really, like, I tell a story about John Lennon that's pretty funny, that literally happened to me, and Jan and Dean, and Neil Sedaka, and you know, Brian Wilson, all kinds of stories about these celebrities. But I also talk about the old days and people like Danny Thomas and Georgie Jessel, and you know, Eddie Cantor is in there. And, you know, so it's a fun book. It tells a lot of fun stories.
Excellent. And I just want to flip to the last page for 1 second, because you know, and it's a picture of Sandy, Dad, and me from October of 2006. That's the last chapter. So Close Encounters of the Celebrity Kind.
Right.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's a fun book.
Wow. Congratulations, Johnny Mathis.
Yeah.
Ooh.
It has some great stories about Dick Clark, Little Richard.
And you've got a lot of personal mementos in here, too.
Well, that's the thing. Since I talked about not throwing anything out,
Yeah.
it came in very handy for this book, because I was able to...
Oh, Brian, I'm going to recommend this one.
I hope
Okay,
so.
my audience, this is a must-read, a must-get book. We've been visiting with Brian Gary, and it's a pleasure.
Oh, and it's briangary.com. I don't know if we mentioned it.
briangary.com. Okay, so I'm endorsing his books and all of his CDs and DVDs. This man's got some great stuff. Stay tuned for more on Live It Up.